It is the 17th consecutive year of lockdown. There is still no funding for the arts. You can't remember the last time you went to a gig, or saw your friends, or had a meal that wasn't in a little capsule form. But you still have a need for validation. So this is going to be a video talking about rejection. And obviously, you look at me, you can tell I've been rejected a number of times in any number of situations. But what we're going to be talking about today is rejections for poetry. So I am, for context, a poet, in case you weren't aware of that. You've just stumbled across this video. Hello, welcome to my bedroom. Normally I'd ask that you know each other better, that we know each other better before I invited you here, but we're not allowed outside at the minute. So I started as a poet on the open mic circuit, doing slams and gigs and everything like this. I've always written. I used to run a very shitty Tumblr blog when I was a lot younger, but I've always written, and kind of that's been how I convey my words. And even when I've gone to perform stuff on stage, it has been with the kind of understanding that this is from a piece of paper, from something I've written down. So poetry as writing has always been something I've done. This is going to kind of cover as much as we can of everything about being rejected, and including just touching on the process for a little bit, people who might not even be at the stage of submitting work anywhere. So, to give you a bit of context, since I've not been able to perform gigs more as much as I'd like to, I've been submitting quite frequently. I've been submitting my poems everywhere, and submitting is this weird kind of thing. If you are a poet and if you are a writer, if you don't do this, you probably should. You're going to read a fucking lot of poetry. You're going to read magazines that you like, follow online online journals that you like that publish a lot of writers that you enjoy, and you're going to find where your voice is by looking around and accumulating all this stuff and finding it. And you're going to get to a point when your writing matches that level of what you're reading. You go, hey, I actually really want someone to read this poem. I don't want someone to just hear it or listen to me yell at them from a stage. I want someone to, be able to open this up at any time when they need it and look at it and enjoy what I've done with the words and where I've laid them out on the page. What you're going to do is you're going to start submitting to these places. So the way to do that is pretty simple by and large, but just in case you're wondering, we're going to take a online magazine as an example. And on their pages, they have their issues page, their masthead page, their publishers page, any other details, and then they'll also have the submissions page. What I'm first going to say is familiarize yourself with wherever you're submitting. If you want your poem to be hosted or represented by an art form, make sure that that publication is something that you would be happy for you to be represented in. You are putting both yourself forward and them forward as a brand, as a lifestyle choice, as fucking whatever. You don't want to go, I've got this lovely poem and it's going to go on this horribly racist, transphobic, homophobic, misogynistic, classist piece of shit website. So ensure that before you submit anywhere, you are checking that this place that you're submitting to is where you want to be represented by. Once you've done all that and you've familiarized yourself with a few of the issues and you've read some of the poets and you've gone, shit, I like this guy, and 90% of the stuff is similar to mine, or how I'd want my stuff to be represented, it's at this stage that you can start submitting. So you go to their submissions page, and every single place is different. Some places will only allow submissions every quarter, or once a month, or between two set dates, or anything like this. But make sure when you look at the places in the submission guidelines that you are reading the guidelines. I know quite a few editors as friends, and they say one of the biggest problems is that people just aren't reading these things, and they put them in place for a reason. So by not reading it and by not adhering to the guidelines that they've asked for, you're automatically kind of putting a mark against your name that you're not what the publication is looking for. So it is important to kind of have that in mind. Again, websites, I'm just using generic examples. Websites will often ask for 5 poems, generally in a Word document. I don't like that personally because Word is not a universal or open format program that you can use. However, if you are reading stuff online, there is also a number of online programs that you can use where they will download as a Word document or anything like that. And I think most journals nowadays accept it as a PDF, which is a universal document, as far as I'm aware, or any other kind of format that you are allowed to. Just a little issue I have, but not a huge one. Make sure you put page breaks between each poems. Make sure if they ask for only 5 pages, even if you've only got 2 poems across those 5 pages, you are sticking to the guidelines. The guidelines will rarely kind of tell you what to write, but they will tell you what they won't accept, what they don't want, and stuff like this. So it's saving your time as much as anything. Check the email. Sometimes you'll be able to submit via a program or a website known as Submittable, which is a big online portal which a lot of the larger publications use, as it's a way to kind of keep track of all of them. But if it's just an email, write a nice cover letter. If they have the names of the editors, it really does help just to say this is for the editors, for the poetry editors, Sam and Samantha Grigino, for example, whoever it may be. Words wise, don't misgender an editor, because that's one surefire fucking way of just getting rejected straight off the bat without them even looking at your work. And while it may be an innocent mistake, again, it is also something that can count against you. Your cover letter and your accompanying email is expected to be as good a representation of your poetry as the poetry itself. You can be as extra or not as you want. Perceived wisdom is to say, be kind of professional in your cover letter, which, you know, you can be. Again, I should say most people expect you to be professional. Just, dear editors, please find attached my submission of poems. I like your journal. This is my favourite poem I've read. You know, like with a cover letter for a job or anything like that, you're just acknowledging what you have read, what you're submitting, and that you have followed the guidelines and being professional. I quite like adding a bit of personality into mine. Sometimes that has had the right effect and people have gone, haha, and responded really positively. Other times they've just been like, Anyway, so you've submitted your poems, you've followed all the guidelines, you've either gone through Submittable or in post, or via email, or through means of a carrier pigeon, smoke signals, however you are submitting that's following it. At this point, I would recommend starting, if you haven't already, I would recommend starting up an Excel spreadsheet so you can keep note of what poems you have written and completed, what poems have been accepted or sent, where, and when you're going to receive them. The lovely Josie Alford has a wonderful video on this. I recommend, she also has a video on cover letters as well, so I do recommend checking that out if you are struggling with this, because I'm not going to go too much into that aspect of it. What you have now is the joy of a waiting period. So you are going to be waiting anywhere up to 6 months, maybe even a year, potentially longer. It could be a shorter time period than that. The timescales to have a margin of error, keep abreast of any socials or websites where they may update the details and let you know exactly when you're going to hear back. And then there is a certain point in which you can chase them, but by and large, my kind of advice would be to just wait the allotted time period plus an extra month or week, depending on how long they estimated it was, and don't bother chasing them unless you really need that poem back to go elsewhere, which in itself is kind of understandable, because there will be other opportunities and other places you want to submit to, and if once you get to a certain stage, you may even predict where you want to submit it to and where the rejections will fall. But that prediction on your spreadsheet of where you want to submit to, based on how long it'll take you to hear back from places, is on you, and it is not actually down to the editor of places to go, well, Sam did want to submit this elsewhere if it was rejected from here, so therefore we owe him this. They don't owe you shit. You're actually, you're sending your work to be represented by them. It would be nice if they met the guidelines, but they're under no obligation to do so. Unless you have paid to submit somewhere. By and large, don't pay to submit places unless it's for an expedited thing where you want it to come back, or it's a competition. That's something for someone else to cover. It's not something I condone. But if you have paid for it, then I do think there is an obligation there for them to respond to you within the timescales they've said. If you've submitted it free, then you're relying on their labour to get back to you at a certain point, so don't be a dick about it. If it's an acceptance, great. You've had one acceptance or 2 acceptances of the a sequence of poems that you've submitted. However, you've then got 3 other poems that have been rejected, or to look at it in a more positive way, you have 3 other poems to submit elsewhere, which is really sick. It's really good. It does fucking suck getting your poems rejected. Like, it really, these can be these can be poems that you have worked on for a long time. You put a lot of your heart, effort, and writing skill into. You may have fielded them out to the community of friends that you have built up through reading their work, through praising them, through whatever, and you've gone, hey, I love your poem, like, we should talk, we should swap poems, we should workshop stuff together, and like, I'm going to shout about how much I love your poem by tweeting about it, or including a snapshot on my socials so that other people can hear the wonder I've done, which, in case that wasn't obvious, I do fully recommend you doing with all poets that you fall in love with. But anyway, you could have done all of that and it's still been rejected. So the first thing I'm not going to do is say, don't worry, it's just a rejection, because they do hurt and they do suck, and it's useful to acknowledge that. But they're not the end of the world. There are a number of reasons why a poem can be rejected. Firstly, is it just doesn't fit with the issue that it's intended for. For example, some magazines and publications will have themes, so it might be on a theme of hope or whatever, and if your work doesn't quite match that, then it's not going to be suited for it. So again, this is paying attention to the submission guidelines. The other aspect is when publications do go forward, is that they might find a theme developing. So it might be, for whatever reason, in that submission window, they've had a load of people submit poems about horses, and they love all these poems about horses. So they're going to go, this is accidentally a horse issue, and you have sent them a fucking donkey poem, which is great, by the way, and I love it. But it then doesn't necessarily go with it. So it might be that a matter of aesthetic, a matter of choice, any number of reasons why it might not be rejected, just because it's not right. Or there is a possibility that something wasn't specified in the submission guidelines. And I'm being open-handed here and saying that some editors may leave stuff off what they're asking for, and it's no fault of theirs. They are human, unless they're a robot editor, which ultimately, I guess, is going to become more and more frequent as the decline of civilization happens. But there might be something in there that they're not looking for, and they haven't thought to say, we're not looking for this. That's one aspect. Second aspect, and I think this one needs to be acknowledged, is that actually maybe your poem isn't as up to scratch as you thought it would be. And I'm going to use myself as an example. I absolutely love it when I write a poem brand new and I'm like, holy shit, the metaphors, man. Like, this is like, you know, everyone's going to be like, people will be crying, people will be just begging me to take them to my bedroom, all of this stuff, just from hearing this poem, from reading this poem. And I submit it straight away, based on that new poem smell, that new poem feeling. It's the honeymoon period of a new poem. It's really common among any writer I know. They all talk about it. You are in love with a poem when it first comes out. As it goes on, you go, oh God. But that's one aspect of why it might be. It might just be you've sent it off too early, before you've done any editing, before you've thought about it. Stephen Lightbown is a Bristol poet, and he has really interesting techniques on how to edit, which he's kind of accumulated from the workshop he's attended to. And in this way, poetry is already a socialist utopia because we share all the work that we absorb and that helps us and everything like this. I'll try and find links. This actually might just be something he sent me personally. Was like, hey, here are some cool tips so that you can use, and I'm just outing him as a sage among poets. But that's what you get for being a brilliant poet, Stephen. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, if your poem is rejected because it's not good enough, it is rare that an editor will actually say it's not good enough. That's on you to decide. And there are a couple of things I would recommend when you get a rejection. Is first go, oh God, I got a rejection. Why? Just to kind of get it out and get that anger out there. I think that's necessary, and I think it's a valid response to a rejection. Second thing is look at it. There are lots of things. I'm a terrible writer in that my punctuation is all over the place. When my editor looked at my work, they were like, they actively said, this is shit. This is good, but it's also shit. And they spent about 3 weeks doing grammatical errors, on just correcting grammatical errors on my poems. It happens to writers at any stage. It's not comment on you as a person. It's just some arbitrary rules that we have to kind of follow to make sense of it. So go through that, check your errors, check any spelling errors or mistakes or anything like that. it might need a bit of work. Poems often do need workshopping. They can exist in a vacuum, but in order to be accepted as good, which is the general consensus of what people like, they actually need to be workshopped. What I hope you have been doing in your journey as a poet and as a person is building a community around you. And the reason I say this is because you grow best with other people. And this is tying into the very first thing I said about the magazines and publications that you read. You have to read stuff to get good. And in order to get better, you have to then put your work out there. This is why we are getting rejected, because we are taking a risk and we're putting our work out there. And a lot of putting that work out there includes talking to your mates you made along the way, like maybe the writers who are at your level, the people on your open mic circuit, and you go, hey, I really loved your work. Like, I think you would have a good eye on mine. Tell you what, do you want to do a poem swap? Like, I'll give you a poem that needs work, you give me a poem that needs work. You make this reciprocal thing. You can also speak to editors and say, hey, you're a professional editor. You edit poetry books. Can you have a look at this work? You can also get mentorships. You can also go to online courses. You can also go to a library and get books out on how to edit poems and read poems. And again, the wonderful Josie Alford does have videos on this. I recommend you look at them when you're editing poems. All these things are necessary. Poems are born of a community. So, you've been rejected because your poem wasn't good enough, and now you've made it better. And now you're going to submit it to elsewhere. But just so we're clear, it doesn't mean your poem is going to get accepted elsewhere, even if you send it to a different place. And I would generally advise sending it on to a different place rather than just resubmitting it after a hasty edit back to the same place, because if you do it down the line, I suspect that's okay, but if you do it immediately, it kind of implicitly says you don't care for the editor's opinion. You're saying you are wrong, read this poem again and accept it this time. Even if that's not the case, it just seems like a breach of etiquette that, while the rules of etiquette in poetry and publishing and editing are all very fucking stupid, that's one breach of etiquette. I just go, submit it, but wait like 6 months to a year before resubmitting it. In the meantime, submit it elsewhere where it may be better suited, may find better stuff. The third thing to do when getting rejected is fucking own it. You know, really, and this is the purpose of this video ultimately, is to acknowledge that at whatever step we get, we are all going to get rejected. I know poets who have been writing, I mean, they say they've only been writing for like a few years, and I'm like, ah, bullshit, you've been writing for decades. You're like a master, you've gone to the top of a mountain and studied the page. But they said, you know, they are getting publications straight away. And that's fine, they're brilliant writers. Some people have that natural thing. I also know writers who have, you know, 3 collections out, 4 pamphlets, they have awards from X, Y, and Z, they've been granted this, they've got an action figure, there's a movie of their life in the works, and they're still getting rejected. And this is an editor's going, I fucking hate that writer, so I'm not going to submit them. It's just, this poem isn't right for me, you know. Could be any number of factors, and if you break yourself down and go, oh, they hate my work, actually you're not acknowledging that perhaps it's any other one of the reasons. Similarly, you go, well, my work isn't for them, but it is fantastic, and not work to improve it. So all these factors, they're all tying in and they're all worthwhile. Ultimately, when you get a rejection, share it with your friends and tell them and go, hey, I just got rejected. I'm normally against the saying you got rejected from who, because that does sometimes do that kind of like, oh, I have received rejections from the best publications in the world. And I'm like, yeah, all right. We've all tried to submit to fucking the Rialto and not got in. No need to shout about it. But that's a case-by-case basis, and that's just a personal pet peeve, which I don't think should apply to anyone. Share your rejections. Let the community know that you are taking risks by submitting and that you are getting knocked back, because that shows that community spirit that you're all in this together, and it really demystifies the process. And I don't think editors ever set out to make the process of submitting poems a mystical one. Sure, the results are magical and wonderful, but I don't think they set out to make it difficult to comprehend. I think it's just become that process because of elitism and the way that we broker power and accept it between ourselves as creators, and I think that bullshit is wrong. So shout about your rejections, allow yourself to be upset about them, look at your rejections and see if they need work, amend them if you can, submit them elsewhere, because they are at the end of the day an opportunity to grow and to make your work better, and any rejection should be seen exactly as that. Um, and yeah, keep going. Like, at the end of the day, you may, and this is speaking from personal experience, I kind of, again, really want to reiterate this isn't me just sitting from a place going, I've had 3 poems published. I kind of know a thing or two. It's absolutely not. Um, but you can go through poems that have been submitted to 17 places that you are in love with, and no editors are. And then eventually may get around to a point where you're putting together your collection, your pamphlet, even a self-made little zine or something like that. And you go, you know what, fuck it, this poem is going in there. Or fuck it, I'm putting it up on my Instagram page. I'm sharing this on Twitter. This is going on my blog. This is the work that I want to represent. And people love it. And this is like really frequently something I hear from a lot of published authors, people with collections out, is that the poem most commented on in the collection or their body of work is the one that is always never accepted elsewhere. And so take that for what it is. Um, editors don't know everything. They are not gatekeepers intentionally. And they're not the arbiters of all taste. So don't take anything like that personally. Acknowledge that you can be wrong. That is always the most important lesson in any creative pursuit and in society. Accept you may be wrong and work to get better. Or work to know where to submit that is more suited to your taste. It's not a case of good or bad. It's a comorbid load of issues. Anyway, I am really only recording this because I just got my 4th rejection from a publication that I've been trying to get into for the past year or so. So this is the voice of fucking experience coming. But yeah, do check out the other writers. Make sure you are building your community by shouting out poems that you love, retweeting them, adding them on social media, carving them into the oak of a dead tree, and don't do it on live trees because that can cause some problems. If the artist gives you permission, I recommend spray painting it into underpasses so that people who walk by will be inspired by the work and even more people can see it. And ultimately know what the purpose of your submitting poems is, why you are writing. It's really easy to get focused on having X, Y, and Z publication, and I don't think that's a bad thing as such. But also, a lot of the time, people forget why they are submitting in the first place. And I can't answer that part for you, only you can answer that. But it's worth considering. Why do you want your poems heard? How do you want your poems heard? And is this way you're pursuing constructive to you or not? And if the answer is not, pursue a different method. Hang a poem in a billboard off the top of a tall building and hire a skywriting plane. Get poetry weird places, man. Post your work online. Get that love and feedback and adoration that you need. Continue to work and be a good writer. Get more rejections. Shout about them, and not from a sadomasochistic place where you're going, oh yes, reject me, daddy. Though if that's your thing, I'm not here to kink shame. You've been wonderful. I've been Sam. This has been a video with really shit lighting. Take care.